So what gives life meaning? What makes a life to be a fulfilling life, to be a happy life, to give you tranquility, peace, but also fulfillment, to make it rewarding? Of course, these are some of the most fundamental questions that many generations of philosophers have struggled with. In his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen R. Covey gives this exercise. Imagine you're at a funeral and you see the scenery, you see the people gathered there, you see the inside of the church, you see the coffin there up front, and everyone has come to pay their tribute to the person that is dead. And you're looking around and 4 people are going to talk about you. Somebody being the partner, the spouse, somebody else being a close friend, somebody else being maybe a co-worker, and somebody else being whoever. And they're going to talk about this person's life, and they're going to say something about them, what they did, how they touched them, how this person that's just died has impacted them. And just before they start to take their place at the lectern and talk about that, you go up front and you look inside the coffin, and lo and behold, it's you. So, the point of the exercise is not to be morbid or anything. The point of the exercise is to ask yourself, if that were the case, and it's not a question of if, but actually one of when, right? When does your life come to an end? What would you like those people to talk about you? What would you like them to say? How would you want this to be heard? If you were there, what would you like them to say about you? And how would you know that your life has been lived well? So, this is a question that some people may be too busy asking themselves in their hectic lives. And for me as a therapist, it's been, and it is, very interesting, because often I see people coming to me for various reasons, like, for example, sometimes physical problems, sometimes emotional problems, and it doesn't take too long to scratch the surface and get to the root cause of it, and there will be some big issues that have been hidden there in plain sight that actually make their life miserable. Not necessarily on all planes, but on some aspect or another. And it's painful to see. It's even more painful to live it, of course. In the past, I used to have difficulties with people suffering. Hell, this is why I became a therapist. I think all therapists up to a point have a problem with people suffering. But you know what? I discovered after many, many, many years, probably 10 years, 15 years into my practice, that that suffering is actually an ally. And why do I say that? Because, you see, suffering is not just some form of universal sadism, right? It's not like the universe is broken and needs fixing. Suffering is an alarm. Suffering is an alarm that has gone off and that warns that, you know, you've come off the rails. There is something that is wrong in your life. Something's not right. And when I say suffering, that can be emotional suffering, it can be physical suffering. Disease is a form of suffering, right? But we need to understand it from the right perspective, and we need to understand what the message is. What is this kind of suffering trying to convey to us? So, after 25 years of being a therapist, I've encountered some key themes that I want to talk to you about in this video. So these are some of the key factors that I've found, and by no means do I mean to be, I don't know, dismissive of other people's findings or claiming that this is completely original. Ultimately, I think that everyone is studying the same animal, meaning us humans. So there's bound to be an overlap. This is just my take on it and my version of it. So guys, in this video we're going to go through 9 factors of what I consider to be those key things of a successful life, a happy life, a meaningful life. Hope you like them. And by the way, if you do like this video, consider sharing it with some of the people that you think might need it, might want it, might be in need to hear these things and to take them into account. And of course, subscribe and all that, you know what to do. If you only had to choose one out of the 9 factors that we're going to discuss today, this should be the one. Extraction should be the one, in my opinion. Because what do I mean by that? And now coming back to the funeral exercise, it sometimes happens that we need to go through a very life-shattering event, like somebody close to us dying or suffering from a very incurable or strong or life-threatening disease that really shakes us out of our ignorance, out of our kind of wake sleep that we're in most of the time, most of us, and gets us to ask those big questions in life. Where am I? Should I pay attention? Should I have paid more attention to this relationship? What are the things that really matter in my life? Where am I in my life? What are my goals? What is fulfilling me? Do I live right now the life that I want? Do I like my life? And it's incredible to see that, most people live their lives as if they were immortal. They are happy to postpone living, and I know how stupid that sounds, but that's actually the reality. They are happy to postpone living until some indefinite time. Because you see, many people just go into this idea that I can postpone my problem. I don't need to solve it right now. I'm in an unhappy relationship. I'm in a toxic relationship. Well, I don't know. I'll just wait some more and see how things are. Or maybe I'm frustrated at work, but hey, I gotta pay the bills, so whatever. Or I don't know, I have some health problems, and maybe I should do something about them, but it's okay, I'm just going to take some pills, and I'm not going to bother with deeper questions like, for example, what generated that problem, right? Is there a deeper issue? Is there maybe a link between the physical health problem and the emotional problems that I'm aware I have in my life? In my practice, I'm amazed by how often people are so aware of the fact that there's a very clear causality between bad emotions, meaning, emotional suffering, and their physical diseases. Even though Western medicine only half-heartedly acknowledges this, even though there are hundreds of studies that show this, and it's successfully ignored, everyday people, laymen, know this very well, and they're able to identify this very well. But at the same time, the paradox of this is most people don't do much about this. They just move on. So it's not until usually there's a life-shattering event, an accident, someone's death, a very serious disease, that we are shaken into asking ourselves the questions that truly matter. And it doesn't need to be like that. It should be that we make it a habit to pause and zoom out and ask ourselves these questions without needing accidents or deaths and things to shatter our lives. This is what I call extraction. And why do I call it extraction? Because even though it's possible to have it to some extent in our daily lives at home, in the middle of our routines, and we'll be talking about routines later on, it's much, much easier and much more important, actually, to regularly extract ourselves from our daily lives and have some retreats. Now, these can be organized retreats, but they can also be self-organized retreats. You don't need to practice some esoteric meditation. I'm not saying meditation is bad. I've been, practicing meditation since almost, I don't know when. But the key thing is not to get lost in the details. It's much more about reflection. It's much more about having a reflective practice that helps us understand what is what in our lives, what matters, what is worthy of our attention, what is inspiring to us, what gives our life meaning. And we would need to do this with regularity. Like, for example, some bigger retreats, like let's say a week or 10 days, at least every 6 months, but maybe a weekend away every month, or every 2 weeks preferably, in which we need to give ourselves a reset. We need to have some form of resetting our senses, our bearings. Which takes me to the second factor. And this is called bearings, values, directions, right? So once you do extract yourself from this busy, hectic life, what do you focus on? What should you be focusing on? And the obvious answer is bearings, values, what gives meaning, what we've just discussed, right? So when I say that, This can easily be turned into a workbook, and I'm going to do that, of course. So if you like what you're seeing and hearing right now, do subscribe, because I will be announcing that workbook and possibly some exercises with it, and exercises meaning we might be doing a course or some other more complex stuff. But there is a practical way to this bearings thing, right? And this is much more about how do you proceed, how do you use that time that you've put aside to extract yourself from your busy schedule. So number one thing would be unstructured time. Why? Because reflection needs space, and we need unstructured time. Don't worry, you're not going to waste time. That's probably people's biggest worry, and if it's not that, it's complete boredom that is people's worries. And actually what's going to happen is going to be that a lot of the stuff that's been at the back of your mind but actually unable to get to you because it was all taken up by the various emergencies in your life, well, now it's going to have the space and time to get to you. So you're going to make a more intimate contact with what is going on inside your mind, inside your soul. What do you feel? What is going on? So even though it's not necessarily formal meditation, if you do take this time off, it will feel a little bit like how formal meditation feels. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing like what you'd expect. There's no Zen-like feeling, there's no mind feeling. Actually, quite on the contrary, you're going to be assaulted by every emergency and every logistical aspect of your life you can possibly imagine. Because they've been at the back of your mind, but now they have the space to come back to you, and you'll be thinking, oh my God, I need to pay that bill and pay the rent and do that and do this and talk to that person. Oh, and call Mike and tell him that. It doesn't sound like much of a retreat, does it? Well, actually, you'd be wrong. That's what a retreat sounds like. We don't do it to make space for logistics. We do it because by making space for all this chit-chat in our minds, that can settle down, like a glass of water that's been shaken up with stuff inside, and then you leave it to slowly drift to the bottom of it, and then clarity comes natural. So, unstructured space, right? Why? Unstructured space will give the mind the chance to settle down. Bear in mind, you will need to have patience to have all this settling down, and it will not feel like anything spiritual. It will feel like something that is much more of a logistical session of how to organize your life. You don't aim for that, but you don't want to push it away, right? You want to do whatever you need to do to just be able to let it go. This is a time for you not to solve these issues, but a time to hear them out, maybe make some notes to handle them whenever. This is not the time to handle them, but it might be that you find it difficult to focus on something else until you've made sure that you won't forget these things, because sometimes the first things that come up are having this flavor of, oh my God, I don't want to forget that, because, you see, this period of time has enabled me to remember that, and how good. Yeah, I need to write it down. So write it down, take it off of your mind. And then the really nice part starts. Then the really valuable part starts. Because the whole idea of this extraction is to provide a framework for you to slow down. And once you slow down, everything will become much, much clearer. Of course, this is necessary. It's not necessarily sufficient, but it's one of the key ingredients. So this is one of the things. So what are you going to do? You're going to do some reflective practice, like, for example, journaling. Write about what are the key drivers in your life? What are your objectives? What are your directions? What are your values? What inspires you? Are you still connected with those things that inspire you? Are you completely confused? Do you have anything that inspires you in your life? And of course, I could easily do a 1-hour video only on this subject. But key thing is meditate, reflect, journal on the things that give life meaning, right? And we've just talked about, slowing down. So another key question here, and this is the third factor that we're going to analyze, is rhythm. A lot of the stuff in our lives is not necessarily bad, not necessarily good. It's not necessarily inherently in any way, but the impact that it has is probably going to be shadowed by our life's rhythm. Now, what do I mean by that? I've encountered many people who have been extremely successful by any standard, almost by any standard, except when it comes to rhythm. So if you have the career that you've always dreamed of, the family that you've always dreamed of, and the friends that you've always dreamed of, and you're healthy, right, and things are going good, can you actually enjoy it if your life is a complete race and there's just too much happening? There's just so many projects that you're involved in, that there's so many tasks that you need to check off. So every day feels like a race. Every day feels like you need to race against the clock to check off all those things, all those tasks that you want to do by the end of the day. And even though, technically speaking, you enjoy or should enjoy all of it, you feel exhausted. And there's no fulfillment at the end of the day, or very little, because you feel exhausted and you feel the need to take a break. But as soon as you take a break, what's going to happen is that you're going to be overwhelmed and you're going to fall behind on all those tasks that want your attention. So if that is you, then you have a rhythm problem, right? And sometimes rhythm can be automatic because we need to do a lot of stuff, and our society, at least in the West, it's very, very fast-paced. So it's easy to fall into the trap because this rhythm is everywhere. Information is coming at us at an incredible pace. Everybody else's lives are happening at an incredible pace. Everybody's suffering pretty much from the same thing. So it's very easy to think that this is normal. Well, it depends how you define normal. If it's defined statistically, yes, it's normal. If you define it as how things should be, then of course it's not normal. So what do you need to do? You need to slow down. That's one of the purposes for which the extraction periods are so important. And that's why I told you that, in my opinion, the number one factor, which is, like in Lord of the Rings, the one ring to rule them all, is extraction. Because extraction automatically slows you down, automatically creates the conditions for reflection and journaling and all that to happen. So it's pretty much all inclusive. Pretty much, not so much, right? So this is why we're talking about all these things. So coming back to the idea of rhythm, the rhythm part is also possibly derived from the fact that we don't know what gives our life meaning. we have forgotten to slow down. We have forgotten to think about the things that actually more pollute our lives than give it meaning. Because at the end of the day, you know, it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, everyone under the sun has 24 hours a day. So, because this resource, time, is so limited, we need to extract ourselves from our hectic schedule, and we need to extract our priorities. What are our priorities? And the concept of priority is based on the assumption that you will probably not be able to do everything. If you were able to do everything that you've assigned yourself to do, then the concept has no meaning and no sense and no purpose. The concept of priorities is based on the assumption, which is very right, by the way, that you will most likely not get everything done, and that some things are more important than others. So what are those for you? And it's funny because I've encountered so many people who have such a difficulty in acknowledging the fact that most likely they will not get everything done today in the time frame that they want. They will get only much less done. I am one of those people. It's very difficult for me to acknowledge the fact that I won't get everything done, because I'm so enthusiastic about things. I want to do that, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this. So for me, all these practices, and by the way, I've been doing these things for a while in my own life. Some for less time, some for longer time. Occasionally I've lost my way, then I found it back, and I lost it again, and I found it back. So, you know, I'm no different from you, really. I mean, and this is, I think, key, because if I found something that works for me, and I've definitely tested it on other people, and I've seen what works for them, these are the same things, and they'll definitely work for you. So, coming back to the rhythm and wrapping it up, one of the things that you should be taking into account in the extraction periods is, how is this rhythm in your life? Are you happy with it? Do you feel the need to slow down? Do you feel that your life is hectic and you need to slow down? Or do you feel that there's too little going on and that you're kind of stuck and nothing much is happening? Again, see, this is not very pure, because the second question can be due to rhythm, but it can also be due to the fact that we don't necessarily have in our lives at this moment those things, those elements that give life meaning. So the values and all that. And then, going past rhythm, we come to an incredibly impacting factor, and that is relationships. What kind of relationships do you have in your life? Now, I don't mean to ask, oh, are they friendship relationships or are they intimate relationships? No. Take a moment and ask yourself this. What are the relationships that define 80 to 90% of my relationship time? I assume that a good part of that would be spent with your spouse or partner, or whatever you want to call it. A good part of that would be spent with your children, if you have any. A good part of that would be spent with friends and colleagues. But which friends do you spend most time with? Which colleagues do you spend most time with at work? So there will be a number of people, usually not that many, when it comes to spending 80 to 90% of the time. And then the rest of the 10 to 20%, there'll be hundreds. But these top 80% will be generally 3, 4, 5, 6 people, not more than that. And the personal development literature is very rich in this subject, and it's well known that the people that we hang out with have an incredible impact on us, on our relationships, on our quality of life, on our health, on our evolution, right? Do we evolve or do we go down? Because that's also an option. There are people who take us down instead of up, and there are people who inspire us and take us up. So the question that I have for you regarding relationships is, which of these relationships do you find to be nourishing and fulfilling? Which of these nourish you, and which of these actually consume you? And I know that this question is really going to rattle some of you, because it is difficult to look this reality in the eye. Because some of the relationships that we would definitely want to have as our most fulfilling can actually be our most consumptive. Like, for example, our relationship with our spouse. It should be the most fulfilling one, right? There's a reason that we have one partner. So it would make sense for that to be one of the most fulfilling relationships in our lives. Is it? If yes, wonderful. How can you improve it? How can you spend more time there? If it's not, what do you need to do? Maybe the relationship with your child is not optimal at all. Maybe some of your friends are actually, pressing you down instead of lifting you up. Maybe some of those are fairly abusive relationships. Which of these relationships in your lives are maybe toxic, maybe abusive, or at least not really that fulfilling? Because you see, if you don't have a reason to be there to say yes, you have all the reasons in the world to say no, because relationships are time-consuming and emotion-consuming. So you want to be very clear about which of these are nourishing and amplify that and make it more so. Maybe spend more time with that person, immerse yourself more into that relationship, be it a friend, be it whatever. And with other relationships, sometimes it's just best to get out. Of course, you don't just get out. Maybe some of these you need to really take into consideration very carefully. Maybe it's your marriage, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a very long time best friend. But that relationship might have started good, but actually has transformed into something that is not so good anymore. There are ways to mend these relationships. There are ways to transform them, and by all means try to do that. But I think that what you'll find is that you know very well which of these can be mended and which of these cannot. Do things in such a way that you don't regret anything. But at the end of the day, you do need to choose, because you only have 24 hours in a day and time is ticking away, and the end of your life will come. And there is this thing called the cost of lost opportunities. By choosing to be in a certain relationship, you lose the opportunity to spend that time and that energy being somewhere else, maybe with someone else. So relationships are incredibly, incredibly defining for our well-being. Right, so we've discussed extraction, we've discussed bearings, we've discussed rhythm, we've discussed relationships. It's time to go on, and the next factor is renewal of perception, right? So basically growth. self-actualization, as some people call it. How can you grow? How can you push the boundaries of your perception? And this is here. There's a saying that I find very, very useful that goes like this. This is not mine. It's a quote I'm paraphrasing. If the you from now would meet the you from 5 years from now and wouldn't think of him or her as a total heretic, you're not progressing enough spiritually. So I'll say it again, right? If the you from now would meet the you from 5 years from now, so basically your future self 5 years from now, and meeting him or her, you wouldn't think that he or she is a total heretic, right? Meaning a total lunatic, a total crazy person. You're not making enough spiritual progress. Now, this is funny and true at the same time. And why do I say it's funny and true? If we are to define evolution, if you were able to completely define how you from 5 years from now would look like and think like, it's not really a new perception, is it? Because if you can perceive with the perception that you have right now, how you would be thinking and perceiving stuff in a number of years, there's no change in perception. A change in perception, by definition, means that right now, with the current level of your perception, you are unable to think and perceive things in the way that you would be doing in a different way when you perceive things in a different way, right? So, by definition, you cannot perceive things now how you would perceive them differently in the future. So, I think that perception is absolutely crucial. Many times, one of the things that I've seen time and again in my practice with patients is this. They sometimes come with a problem, sometimes these problems can be physical, and then we go into a detective work and we think what's going on, we explore together what's going on, and invariably we start looking at the bigger picture, and then at the bigger picture still, and at the bigger picture still. And then the therapy that they undergo is actually meant to encourage them to grow and to boost their self-esteem and to, really help them grow inside. And of course, as this thing goes on, meaning the therapy, the physical part is integrated with the emotional part, and it's integrated because they are linked together. But what I want to say is, at the end, what happens is that these patients are more happy and more fulfilled by the change in perception that they've encountered through this process, rather than the fact that they don't have those symptoms that they came for anymore. So usually at the end of therapy or some years into therapy, they are much more grateful for the fact that this has given them, this meaning the problem that has sent them to me, this has given them the opportunity to actually grow and understand and change their perception incredibly much. And they value this so much more, and they don't give a damn about the symptoms. Yes, the symptoms are gone, but that's not what they're happy about. So my question to you is, right, regarding renewal of perception. What habits can you get into your life so that you grow? What courses can you start so that you push the boundaries of your knowledge? What books can you read? What authors can you follow? What podcasts can you listen to? So that this is a habit that pushes you forward like a plant growing every day. Not necessarily growing at an immense speed. It's not the speed that counts. It's the continuity of it. You need to be growing every day. You need to be growing every week, every month, every year. You need to have something that pushes you to grow constantly. So this is the renewal of perception. And then we move on to the next factor, and the next factor is support structures. So, for example, when life is difficult, when the shit hits the fan, what support structures do you have? Support structures meaning, whom do you call? Whom do you go to? Maybe you have a circle of friends. Maybe you have a therapist. Maybe you have a spouse. Maybe you have a mentor or a spiritual person or a spiritual guide. Maybe you have some practices, like, for example, I don't know, prayer, meditation, tarot, I don't know, anything. So the key thing is you need to make sure, in order to have a fulfilling life, that you have this support structure, meaning you need to know that someone or something has got your back. Preferably, you would have all those things that I've just mentioned, right? The bigger and more stable the support structure, the more that you're going to be making sure that you're happy, and that when life does get rough, and eventually, occasionally, it always does for everyone, you have people and practices there to have your back. So, moving on. We've talked about support structures. What else? Personal therapy. Personal therapy is also incredibly important. It's one of the key factors. And if you're watching this, and if you've watched until now, you're probably among those people who don't think that personal therapy is something that only crazy people do or sick people do. Personal therapy is actually something that is necessary as a practice to make sure that our emotional intelligence is up to speed. We need to learn how to live our lives. We need to learn how to relate to things and to people and to relationships and to, there's a whole understanding that simply does not come by itself. Everyone needs personal therapy. We all have wounds. We all have had imperfect childhoods. And when I say personal therapy, I don't necessarily mean psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, yes, is very good. It can be extremely helpful, but it can be other types of therapies as well. For example, it can be any kind of therapy that has an emotional impact with the potential to heal past wounds, past emotional traumas. And when I say traumas, don't think that I'm talking only about, I don't know, things like having been in an accident or having been raped or something. That's a very specific kind of trauma, but most people have not had that kind of trauma. In the words of Gabor Mate, which is probably a psychologist you've heard of, he once said that trauma is not necessarily something bad that has happened to us. Trauma is something good that didn't happen to us. So, for example, the most common kind of trauma is we didn't receive enough love, validation, nourishing from our mother, from our father. We didn't feel safe enough, we didn't feel stable enough in our family, right? The atmosphere was not conducive to that. Or maybe it was stable, but it was cold or detached emotionally. Or maybe we had an excellent relationship with our parents, but maybe one or both were not physically present enough. Maybe we were taken to spend more time with our grandparents because our parents had to, earn money and work and so on and so forth. But for a child, being away from the nourishment that parents give to their children is, if it continues longer term, is traumatic. So personal therapy is very, very important to have in order to actually be able to live this kind of fulfilling life. So we move on and we have 2 factors left. And the next factor we're going to talk about is called contribution. Right, so this is so important, and I know it sounds a little bit silly of me because to about every factor that I've talked about, I've started saying that this is so important because they are so important, and there are all these ingredients are necessary. So when I talk about contribution, the question is, if you want to be living a fulfilling life, it's not only, or it's not so much about what you get from life, it's also so much about how you help others. How do you help others get more from life? It's most of the time more fulfilling to help others, to bring a contribution to other people's lives when it comes to personal happiness than actually doing something for yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, this sounds dangerously close to a very negative practice, which is to have a double standard between you and others and to give more than you get. That's not something that I'm advocating here at all. What I'm advocating here is making sure that you reflect on what you want your contribution in this world to be. How do you want to improve, to better people's lives? How can you make them a little bit better? Or in a more spiritual way, once you're not on this earth anymore, what marks do you wish to have left? How do you want yourself to be remembered? What do you want to have left in the people that are in your life? How do you want those people at your funeral to be talking about you? How do you want them to remember you? How do you wish to have touched them so that it is a way that, once you think of it, is inspiring to you? What do you wish to bring in other people's lives? And that can be enormously and incredibly fulfilling. So again, it's not only about what we get from life, it's also what we give to life and to people. And that is incredibly important. And finally, if you think that all these things sound nice, you're probably thinking, wow, there's a lot of them. And it is. It's true. And what's also true is that these things are not so common knowledge. This is not what society encourages us to do. Some of them are, let's say, more encountered than others. Others are outright outlandish. But it's not something that society helps us to integrate easily, right? So you'll be needing to invent this practice, this routine in your life like a pioneer, like, you need to make it work for you, and you'll most likely not be seeing other people around you do all of these things. Maybe some of them are doing some of them, but to do all of these things is very rare. So this last factor that I'm talking about is, how do you organize yourself? This is more of a logistical part. This is more of a rational, cognitive part. How do you organize your schedule so that you do all these things? And it's funny because it's actually not so logistical in part, because a lot of these things are reflective, they're spiritual, they're emotional, they're not logical. But you do need to logically decide the time frame that you assign for them. Because, for example, as I said, you need that extraction. You need that unstructured time to be thinking about all these things. So, the most powerful thing that you can do when it comes to structures is a routine, is to make these things a habit. And how do you do them? You do them one at a time. You must understand that creating new habits and new routines is incredibly difficult. Even though rationally it might be sounding so common sense, so easy. Like, for example, from starting tomorrow, I'm going to be reading 20 minutes a day. That's a very difficult thing to be doing. Yes, you can be reading tomorrow 20 minutes a day, but will you be still doing that 6 months from now? That is the question. And most people find it difficult. So there are various books, like, for example, the first one that comes to mind is called Atomic Habits. I forgot the name of the author, but by the way, it's an excellent book. I've read it and I've applied it. And when it comes to implementing new habits, that is a priceless resource. I definitely recommend it. So my point is, you need to find a way to organize all these things. So go through all of them again and try to organize them in a way that makes sense for you. So, for example, for myself, I organize myself into yearly, trimestral, monthly, and weekly sessions, and then daily, right? So what do I mean by that? At the beginning of every year, I think of what I want to do, right? What are the objectives for me for that year? These are based on Chinese metaphysics because it's much easier to be in the flow of the universe. So, for example, I take into account the year's energy and what would come most naturally for me, for my chart, having taken that into account. I also take into account, the Bazi part, the Feng Shui part, and some other stuff. I do tarot readings for myself and for others. So I take all these things into account because it's not so much about what I want to do, but also what is going to come naturally. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time and energy fighting what would come naturally. So these are methods to do that. So then I break those objectives down into trimestral objectives, and I make a plan. And then I break those down into monthly and then weekly objectives. And then every day I set myself some tasks based on that. So this is just how I do it. This is just a way of how to do it. Again, I could be talking about this for hours, and there are people who are specialized in life management and time management skills, and there are a ton of books on the market that you can find. But key thing is, you want to take all the other factors and organize them in such a way that they're all accounted for, Luckily, because most of them are emotional and spiritual, the factors are different, but actually logistically, what you want to make sure is that you focus on the extraction part. That's the only part that is logistically heavy. Other than that, everything else will follow, because the extraction part will make sure that you think about all these things, and that thinking, that reflection, all the process that you do in the extraction part is going to help you find the routines and the habits that are important for you. So guys, this has been a pretty lengthy video, and here they are, what I call 9 factors of a fulfilling life. I hope you've enjoyed them, and stay tuned. There'll be more videos coming up, and if you've liked this, subscribe, follow, share, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next video.